hello there. Thank you for joining me today. I just wrapped up a show, but I'm not going to be recording it today because I found a major flaw in the group. I don't like to bury the lead, so let me tell you what's going on. Um, I was, let me see here, let me start over again. For the last 30 years, this group called RAIN, RAINN, has been in charge of a lot of very questionable things. And I was working on a show, just about wrapped it up, about the Department of Defense and the Pentagon, same place, but and all the issues with children, all that with them. I've talked endlessly about the Department of Defense and all the child pornography they have on their computers and all that kind of stuff. None of that is speculation. It's all been confirmed. So anyway, during the show, at the beginning of the show, I keep reading about RAIN. That's RAINN. And they're saying, well, RAIN statistics, they say this, they say that. Well, RAIN was founded in 1994 by a man named Scott Berkowitz with initial funding from the Atlantic Group and Warner Music Group. And who is their biggest customer? Well, if you guess the Department of Defense, you'd be guessing correctly. So, yeah, I looked up RAIN when I was going through and writing the show. Obviously, I looked it up. I didn't find anything bad about it. No one was saying, oh, those people at RAIN, they're a bunch of liars. I didn't find a single thing about them. So I kept proceeding along. And as I was finishing up writing the show, I thought, well, let me go take a look at their financial records. And then the ball flew into the air. Well, come to find out, RAIN is mainly funded by the DoD. So I'll be getting to that in a second here. And I'll have more today about that cube. The USA is a satanic nation. It always has been. So let's start with something that should make anyone feel sick. For much of modern legal history, rape was illegal, but only if the victim fit a very specific definition. If you were a man or a boy, the law often didn't see you. Assaults that today would be recognized as rape were dismissed, minimized, or simply ignored because the statutes themselves said those victims didn't exist. Think about what that means. Crimes were happening. The victims were there. The perpetrators were known. But the law, the very system designed to protect the vulnerable, I think we got a little bit of inversion going on here. Do they really protect the vulnerable or do they protect the elites? But it was written in a way that allowed entire categories of victims to disappear, and this was all by design, and I'll be getting a lot more into that in a second. As of this week, Dubai, not looking too good. I suggest you fire your public relations folks. Do you realize that you need a license to operate in Dubai as an influencer? That could explain for some of their frantic looks. Hey, it's safe here. It's safe here. They're looking like a pack of fools because that is what they are. Yeah, you go to a country like Dubai to skip out on your taxes and then you're caught, right? Well, I got a little news for you if you're thinking about going to Dubai to become an influencer yourself. You realize you have to have a license, right? So they know where you are. They know how you're operating at all times. So I kind of suspect if somebody says, I suggest you say a few good words about Dubai and forget that there's missiles flying over your head. People are going to jump to the camera. Yeah, everything's great here. Everything's great here. And then they bring in the Tate brothers. Oh, come on. What a PR disaster. Your PR people either hate you or maybe it's the leader of Dubai pushing this effort. Tell them to go out and say this. No, tell them to say this. Yes, they're just little puppets on your string, are they? And that's exactly how they look. Before everybody gets too crazy about stuff, you realize the USA leads the world in trafficking, right? Dubai has slavery, but the US has the trafficking under control. So, yeah, and that's according to their own reports. In case you were wondering, the strongest post empire connections were with the monarchy of Egypt, ruled by the Muhammad Ali dynasty. Who ended up in Egypt? Well, if you were wondering what happened with the people from the Ottoman Empire, well, first place they fled to was Egypt. Funny thing, huh? And then, of course, they all seem to fly to Egypt. Since everybody's in the news about Iran and all those missiles and stuff, on January the 16th, 1979, the last Iranian monarch, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, left Iran during the escalating Iranian Revolution. His plane flew to Egypt, where he was welcomed by Egyptian President Anwar Sadat. Sadat was one of the few leaders willing to publicly support the Shah at that moment. Egypt gave him a safe first refuge after he fled the country. Kind of like flying home to their own relatives, right? I'd like to point out something that I keep seeing in the comments, and it's something that has been on my mind for an extremely long time. I'll just read the quote. This is the crux of most problems in America. It does not matter how bad the problem is. If the average American is not personally affected, they do not care to even want to know the problem even exists. Just sit on that one and think about it. Are you one of those people? Do you really get more riled up when it happens to you and otherwise you're not really paying much attention? Like, if you were one of those families that was escaping the church because your child was being raped, what about the other people? They didn't escape because it wasn't their child? I hate to sound so cruel, but I want you to think about these things. Think about your own actions in solidarity. It's in all kinds of ways what a racist world this is. They even have words for it. They call the people in Dubai expats. No, really, they're migrants, aren't they? They're migrants. But the people that look white and hang around places like Dubai to skip out of their taxes, they get called expats. They even have words for themselves. Another thing I wanted to point out, I keep wanting to point this out and I keep overlooking it. Do you realize that Donald Trump's ex-wife, and I'm telling you this not to be a gossip, well, sort of, I'm gossiping, but it's true, right? So I'm not like making it up. I want you to focus a little bit, if you have the ability and if you're willing to, start thinking a little bit about these monsters running the world. Who raised these monsters, right? How did they get to be the monsters they are? And I'm certainly not making a bid for any kind of uh, sympathy for them, but I do have sympathy for them. I'm not a psychopath. I have empathy, I have a conscience. And yes, any child being brutalized, no matter if they turn out to be a psycho themselves or their parents were psychopaths, I feel empathy for them. That child did not give their consent. So they, of course, end up doing a lot of kind of, I would call them screwy things, right? Probably why they put so much focus on calling the rest of us crazy because their own people in their own world are about as nutty as they can be. And let me tell you why. Do they murder their own? Yes, of course they do, all the time. And guess who got murdered? Well, I think she was murdered, but you'll have to decide for yourself. Ivana Trump, ex-wife of Donald J. Trump, from Germany. Ivana Trump has a grave at Trump's Bedminster Golf Course. Yes, Ivana Trump was buried at Trump's Bedminster Golf Course. And as far as I could tell, she is the only example that I have been able to find of somebody burying an ex spouse on a golf course. Most courses avoid burials because of zoning, environmental, and business issues. Well, how did Ivana die? Well, she died from a blunt impact injuries to the torso. The manner of death was written off as an accident. I would have to say, maybe, maybe not. Investigators concluded the injuries were consistent with a fall down the stairs in her Manhattan townhouse. So, in certain jurisdictions, cemetery land can be harder for creditors or governments to seize or develop. So Burying Ivana on that golf course may make it harder for somebody to seize the golf course down the road. That's one option. Because cemetery plots are treated as protected burial grounds. So, how did she end up dead? Well, there was a hearing in that she was due to appear to testify at, and it was a legal impact, and it was a temporary. There was some depositions being held about some things that Donald Trump had been up to, right? And then all of a sudden, sadly, on July the 14th, 2022, Ivana Trump died after a fall at her Manhattan townhouse. It just amazes me that right before this hearing, when she was going to testify, I don't know what she was going to testify about, but she was going to testify. She falls and dies, right? And so Trump's legal team requested a short postponement of the deposition. And the attorney general, of course, granted the request. And then when the deposition did happen, it happened a month or two after that. And during that deposition that Ivana wasn't at because she was dead, Trump invoked the Fifth Amendment more than 400 times. So, yeah, color me suspicious, but yeah, they do, in fact, kill their own. So if you're sitting there all comfy and thinking, hey, I'm one of them, I'm one of the elites, I'm on the safe path, I wouldn't be so quick. I would not be so quick. And speaking of that, I've been going through my files because I'm getting ready to leave the game board soon. So I've been going through my files and pulling out details. So we'll make something of today's show. It's going to be about all these laws about rape and all that kind of stuff, how they hid this rain deal, the rain, the people that involved with the DOD. Yeah, they specifically hid that. And that alone is suspicious, right? That you hide the fact that the main organization reporting rape and incest is connected to the Department of Defense. Yeah, I would hide that myself. So I'm just pulling out some random files here to go over interesting things that you might want to know before I trot off the game board soon here in the near future. These people all love to have these wrestling things, right? They really are a bunch of low class thugs, right? I mean, who goes to WWE wrestling events, right? I mean, that's something that more, well, I don't know. I've never met anybody who went to a WWE event, okay? I've never engaged with people who said, hey, there's a WWE event coming to town. So and so is going to beat the crap out of so and so. You want to come with us? I've never even been invited, so maybe I'm jealous, right? So there's some connection here. I had a file about this wrestling business, so let me just humor me and listen to this. Since they're all into wrestling, as a matter of fact, Trump is talking about having a major wrestling event at the White House soon. So let's talk a little bit about wrestling here. One of the oldest visual records of organized wrestling comes from Beni Hassan, a Middle Kingdom Egyptian necropolis. So they historians believe they were having these wrestling matches in Egypt for military training, athletic competition, and entertainment during festivals. Well, it kind of reminds me. So it appears that Egypt clearly had structured wrestling thousands of years before Rome, because they're always talking about the gladiators and the colosseums and all that. But it was actually the Greeks who turned wrestling into an organized sport. So wrestling became part of the ancient Olympic Games. They developed what's called pankratonium, a brutal sport combining wrestling and striking. And pay attention to that wrestling and striking later. So the Romans then transformed combat sports into mass public entertainment, but it all started with the Egyptians. And the Roman system included gladiator fights, boxing, and wrestling demonstrations. Events occurred in amphitheaters like the Colosseum. So essentially, Egypt was the earliest documented wrestling. Greece formalized it as a sport with the Olympics. Rome turned combat into massive public spectacle. So modern wrestling evolved from 19th century carnival wrestling and stage promotion, not directly from Rome. See, I would have guessed it came directly from Rome, but it's even lower class than that. It comes out of carnivals. Hey, come out of here, this tent over here. So, yeah, so that is where wrestling comes from, in case you ever wanted to know. I am a big fan of odd details. So today you're going to get your fill. Another thing that's been on my mind, big tech leaders really want people to start having babies. Well, is it possible? Is it just possible that people that are caring and kind and really care about those babies do not want to invoke and have babies being born into this kind of environment? Besides the fact of all the medical uncertainty, all the high natal deaths in U.S. hospitals, all of these things likely factor in. So these big tech leaders like Elon Musk are constantly talking about everybody should be having babies. Well, no, sorry, folks. You are the reason that people are not having babies. People do not want to have babies simply to escape the evil that's going on in this world. That is really why it's happening. And nobody in particular would want to have a baby with one of these Silicon Valley people. Trust me, these people are, well, I will just stop while I'm ahead here. So let me talk about one other thing. I've been talking about the Gulf states are likely hiding their DNA issues. Well, the Rothschilds are also hiding their DNA issues. The Rothschilds have a big deal going on, and they've been hiding their DNA stuff for a very long time. So if you're ever interested, you might want to take a look into that. And then when I was looking at Middle Eastern things, and especially the Gulf states in particular, they love those falcons. You know, those birds, Falcon, falcons, right? They talk about falcons. They go out and they use falcons to as sport. And these people love falcons and horses, okay? Now remember gypsies and horses, right? So there's also a very famous movie called The Maltese Falcon, and that starred Humphrey Bogart. The Maltese Falcon story references Charles V, the most powerful Habsburg ruler of the 1500s. So the Knights of Malta really did so somehow they came up with some weird deal, and the Knights of Malta had to give him a falcon tribute each year. And the jeweled treasure in the film is a fictionalized version of that historical tribute. So, yeah, it's such a big deal that they would award these falcon tributes each year because there was a treaty written and it required that the Knights of Malta were required to deliver one specific tribute each year. And that tribute was a single trained falcon. The bird was presented to the Spanish viceroy of Sicily, who represented Charles V. So why Sicily? Well, because Sicily was the administrative center of Spanish rule in the region. So the tribute was given each year on All Saints' Day on November the 1st, and the birds became known as the Falcon of Malta. The falcon had several layers of meanings in 16th century aristocratic culture. In medieval systems, landholders often paid symbolic rents to acknowledge loyalty. Examples in Europe included they might pay one white horse, a pair of gloves, or a hawk or a falcon. And the tribute meant we hold this land under your authority. So falcons were elite hunting birds associated with aristocrat. I can't say that one, but anyways, so giving a falcon to a king was a prestige gift, not just some random animal. So the Knights of Malta were essentially a naval military order fighting the Ottomans. The tribute acknowledged that they defeated Malta on behalf of Charles V's empire. Malta sits in the middle of Mediterranean sea routes. Control of Malta allowed forces to monitor the Ottoman fleets, the North African corsairs, and trade routes between Europe and the Levant. The Knights of Malta fortified the island heavily. The biggest moment came in the Great Siege of Malta in 1565, when they defeated a massive Ottoman invasion. That victory made Malta famous across Europe. And then we have the god Horus, Horus. The falcon became embodied in the deity Horus. Horus was the sky god. His eyes represented celestial bodies. The right eye represented the sun, his left eye, the moon. This belief tied the falcon directly to cosmic order. When Egypt unified around 3100 BC, rulers adopted Horus as their protector. So the king was considered the living Horus. Every Egyptian king had a Horus name written beneath a falcon symbol. This created a powerful idea. The ruler governs Egypt because the sky god authorizes him. Falcon imagery therefore became state propaganda for royal legitimacy. The strongest modern falcon culture exists in the Gulf. I told you I like weird details. So where do these places exist? Well, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, and Kuwait. Here, falconry is both heritage and a luxury sport. Both falcons and eagles share traits that ancient societies associated with authority. They fly higher than other birds. They have exceptional eyesight. They are apex predators. They strike suddenly and decisively. So in Europe and the Mediterranean, the eagle became the dominant imperial symbol. So Roman Empire used the aquila, which is the eagle standard for its legions. The double-headed eagle later symbolized imperial authority in Byzantine Empire and Holy Roman Empire. The eagle represented imperial reach, military dominance. Rule over East and West would be the double-headed eagle. And many modern states still use the eagle. The United States uses the bald eagle. Germany, the federal eagle. Russia, the double-headed eagle. And Poland, the white eagle. It's also interesting the countries that use the eagle, right? The U.S., Germany, Russia, and Poland. Kind of like the areas we're circling, right? So, so for each civilization, the Egyptians had the falcon. Rome had the eagle. Byzantine had the double-headed eagle. Holy Roman Empire had the double-headed eagle. Modern nation states have the eagle. And Gulf monarchies have the falcon. Eagles and falcons are both birds of prey, and they're also called raptors, Raptors. A bird of prey is defined by a few key traits. They have sharp talons for grabbing their prey. They have a hooked beak for tearing meat. They have exceptional eyesight for spotting prey at long distances. And they have predatory hunting behavior. Both eagles and falcons share these characteristics. Eagles are larger raptors in general, such as the aquila and the hylacius. So that is why they use falcons in the Gulf monarchies. But isn't it interesting that the Gulf monarchies are carrying on the tradition, but they're using the falcon? So, another strange thing I'd like to talk about, weird little detail. If you had the power to change your name, let's say you had some really rasty relatives who raped children and did all kinds of things. If you had the power to change your name so you wouldn't closely identify with that relative, I think most of us would probably take that thing like, yeah, I'm glad to change my name. Because remember, after in Belgium, after all the stuff with all the stuff in the castles and all the horror that went on over in Belgium, hundreds of people literally changed their names to get away from that name going on in Belgium, right? So let's talk about names in the UK. The current royal house is the House of Windsor, established suspiciously in 1917. Funny thing, same year as the Habsburgs and all of them went away. 1917, the House of Windsor pops up. But in the 1960s, Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip, the one who wanted all of us dead by a virus, decided that their direct descendants, who were not styled HRH or Prince or Princess, would use the surname Mountbatten Windsor. Mountbatten Windsor was to be their official name, okay? Mountbatten came from Prince Philip's Anglicized family name, which originally was Battenberg, okay? Mountbatten was both a sentimental and symbolic target. He was one of the most respected members of the royal family and was serving as a mentor to then Prince Charles. Mountbatten was Prince Charles's favorite. He called him Uncle Dickie. He was murdered at age 79 by the IRA. He used his power and position to abuse his victims, boys aged between 8 and 12, according to people who worked for him. A detailed account of Mountbatten's criminal abuse of children was published by a Melbourne newspaper in 1987. It was based on disclosures made by one of Mountbatten's former naval subordinates. Mountbatten also screwed over India and Pakistan. There was a botched process of partition that saw the slaughter of more than 1 million people, and some 15 million people were displaced when he was carving up India. Untold numbers were maimed, mutilated, dismembered, and disfigured. Countless lives were scarred. So, this is what Mountbatten's rule was in getting out of India. When they were leaving India, he made it into a holy terror, okay? Drawing on nearly 2 centuries of detailed data on tax and trade, historians have calculated that Britain drained a total of nearly $45 trillion from India during the period 1765 to 1938. $45 trillion was estimated to have been taken from India and Pakistan by the Brits. It happened through the trade system. Prior to the colonial period, Britain bought goods like textiles and rice from Indian producers and paid for them in the normal way, mostly with silver, as they did with any other country. But something changed in 1765, shortly after the East India Company took control of the subcontinent and established a monopoly over Indian trade. Here's how it worked. The East India Company began collecting taxes in India and then cleverly used a portion of those reserves, about a third, to fund the purchase of Indian goods for British use. In other words, instead of paying for Indian goods out of their own pocket, British traders acquired them for free, buying, quote unquote, from peasants and weavers using money that had just been taken from them. Basically, anyone who wanted to buy goods from India would do so using special council bills, a unique paper currency issued only by the British Crown. And the only way to get those bills was to buy them from London with gold or silver. So traders would pay London in gold to get the bills and then use the bills to pay Indian producers. When Indians cashed the bills in the local colonial office, they were paid, quote unquote, in rupees out of tax revenue, money that had just been collected from them. So once again, they were not in fact paid at all. They were defrauded. Meanwhile, London ended up with all the gold and silver that should have gone directly to the Indians in exchange for their exports. And that's just one aspect of the Mountbattens. And it's pretty funny that they would insist in the 60s that all royals carry the Mountbatten name. And the Mountbatten name has all the abuse that went on in India, all the abuse of raping boys, all of that comes under the Mountbatten name. They are proud of who they are. I want to remind you of something else. They're proud of who they are. Many social media posts now are talking about Mandelson over there in the UK and his connection to Epstein. Mandelson was the guy standing around in his underwear. What a classy guy. But what's going on is this: they are not getting charged. Mandelson and Prince Andrew or Mountbatten or whatever the heck his name is are not getting sexual abuse charges. They are getting other charges for like giving away secrets and stuff. So people are conflating, oh, a couple of them got rounded up. Yes, but they got rounded up for something else. They did not get rounded up for abusing those children. And of course, the Royals also supported Jimmy Savile for all that time. Also, we have Ted Heath, and these are just off the top of my head. Ted Heath, a Tory PM, was a serial pedophile. What happened to the boys on his boat? He would go out and take boys on his boat and they would disappear. That is the history of the UK. And let's not forget those royals, because right now people are saying, well, Charles could step aside and make room for William and Kate. They are just perfect. Really? They're just perfect. Well, let me remind you of one more other little thing. Pie. Pie. There's a man associated with Pie. His name is Lord Justice Fulford. He was named as an advisor to the Queen. He was a key backer of the notorious Pie Group. What does pie mean? Is it cherry pie or apple pie? No, pie means pedophile information exchange. Police suspect the group of abusing children on an industrial scale. This Lord Fulford guy, at the time, it was calling for the age of consent to be lowered to just 4 years old. You heard me, 4 years old. The Pedophile Information Exchange, or PI, was a British pro pedophilia activist group active from 1974 to 1984, campaigning to lower or abolish the age of consent. Sir Adrian Fulford, often referred to as Lord Justice Fulford, was then appointed a judicial appointment commission to the Queen in the prior year. So, and then we have the London guest house where the boys were taken and raped. And Fulford said in response to the reporting that he was not a supporter of Pi, even though he was a founding member. Yeah, they just lie like through their teeth, right? Tom Watson revealed that the Pedophile Information Exchange, a group that wanted the age of consent lowered to 4 years old, were directly funded by the Home Office. Pi published propaganda material seeking to normalize sex with children and place it in locations including public libraries. They had a booklet called Pedophilia, Some Questions and Answers, was published by Pi in 1978 and may have been paid for by the British government. It peddles a huge number of lies about child sexual abuse. And the very first page it says pedophiles are often a force for social good. And let's also not forget about Jersey. Jersey is the place where they go for their tax havens. Jersey has been known to they have buildings that are standing still today where children were locked into buildings and chained and actually cuffed and things, horrifically abused over on Jersey. Yeah, that all happened under the Royals also. And let's not forget one of my favorite ones, the child hotline, where they actually tricked children into calling into a hotline to report abuse. Yeah, that is what happened all under the Brits. And also Wonderland. Yeah, the big, big, big deal to go and hide all the abuse of children. Wonderland. I've talked about them all. I'm sure there are more. But yeah, do you really think Catherine and William are going to clean all this up? Do you really think that? Oh, come on. Let's at least try to act like we're civilized. Let's try to act like we have parts of our brains left. This is so wrong. It's always been wrong. It's always going to be wrong. I don't care how you want to dress up this pig. It is still a pig. And speaking of pigs, Les Waxner, the guy that I was talking about in the show before this one, Les Wexner, the guy that supported Jeffrey Epstein. I was watching his interview, sitting there, lying, chuckling, laughing. What did he have on his wrist? Well, he had the red Kabbalah, the red string. He had that bracelet on his right wrist. They all have a tell. Open your eyes. Wakey, wakey. You can see all of them if you just open your eyes. And the funny thing I found interesting when I was cruising around, everybody seemed to know that Epstein was about trafficking, right? But nobody seemed to think about that Sultan dude, and all the ports that they control. I would say big deal. That guy in the UAE and those routes and the trafficking, that is a huge, huge deal. And nobody, all these so called people concerned about trafficking, nobody even hiccuped over that guy running those ports where trafficking is probably taking place. So let me talk about some of these comparisons now. Oh, hold on a second. I got a cat here. Okay, and I pulled out another file we might want to take a listen to here. In their churches and inside the Vatican, there are so many drawings of the all seeing eye of Lucifer, the same eye that's worshipped by the Illuminati. The same pyramid shape with the eye of Lucifer is posted in their chairs, walls, and cloths. They worship the same gods with Illuminatis, but holding the name of Christianity. So if you look at the Vatican, in the seat of the Pope in Roman Catholic Church, there is an inverted cross, which is a sign of the Antichrist. The same inverted cross is used by devil worshippers in all Illuminatis, representing that they are Antichrist members. These signs are not mistakes put in the Pope's seats. They also have a hall. The hall of Pope is built in a reptilian shaped serpent with two eyes. The front part of the hall, there is a background drawing of demonic creatures. And how can that cross and the same sign be in the Roman Catholic Church? They are devil worshippers in one with the Antichrist. And here's the interesting thing about churches. I was looking into who benefits the most by being a nonprofit. Well, looky here. Churches. Churches are the biggest benefactors, at least in the United States, for nonprofit status. If you run a church, you do not have to apply any 990 forms. Your financial disclosures do not become public. You do not get any IRS audits, or maybe you might, but they're rare and politically sensitive. So the biggest benefactor of nonprofits are churches. Number two, hospitals and schools. But hospitals and schools are a little trickier because they have mandatory public reporting. Their compensation disclosures are required. Their executive pay is visible. And that difference in my book is pretty substantial. So churches really appear to get away with quite a lot. Churches often enjoy broader compliance exemptions. have less financial transparency, are politically sensitive to regulate. So let's talk about that pagan symbols in these churches. The transition of a single eye into a Christian symbol began during the Renaissance, a period where artists searched for new ways to represent timeless religious concepts. The concept of God's omnipresence was difficult to portray literally. How do you paint all knowing? Artists began using the eye in a triangle. One of the most famous early examples is in Pontormory's 1525 painting, Supper at Damascus. The symbol appears above the head of Jesus, representing the presence and sight of God the Father. By the 17th century, it was a common and well understood piece of religious iconography appearing in church art, devotional books, and architectural designs across Europe. It was as mainstream a Christian symbol as the cross or the dove. So in Christianity, the return of Jesus is called the second coming. And you want to pay attention to this because right now, the U.S. military, they're all talking in coded language about the end times. So in Christianity, the return of Jesus is called the second coming. Christians believe Jesus Christ is the Son of God and the Messiah. He was crucified, resurrected, and ascended to heaven. He will return at the end of history. Common elements in Christian theology. Jesus returns in glory. The dead are resurrected. Final judgment occurs. God establishes the kingdom of God fully on earth. And the key biblical references include the book of Revelation, Gospels of Matthew, and the Acts of the Apostles. The verse in Acts says that Jesus will ascend. Jesus who ascended will return in the same way he left. In Islam, Jesus is known as Isa ibn Maryam. So Islam and Christians both have a Jesus. The Muslims believe Jesus was a prophet and messenger of God and not divine. He was not crucified in the Islamic view. And according to Islam, God raised him to heaven. Islamic end time beliefs include Jesus will return before the day of judgment. He will defeat the fake Messiah, the Dajjal. He will restore justice and true monotheism. Eventually, all humans face final judgment. Important Islamic texts discussing this include the Quran, and there's hadith collections such as, I don't know, a couple of Muslim selections. The major differences, the big theological divide is who Jesus is. Christians say he's a prophet, and the Islam says he returns as a prophet restoring true faith. So they both say he's returning, right? So both religions believe Jesus is alive and will return before the final judgment. They disagree about his nature and authority when he returns. In Christianity, sin is primarily addressed through the sacrifice of Jesus Christ. Humanity is considered sinful and unable to fully redeem itself. Jesus' death is understood as atonement for the sins of humanity. So many Christian traditions teach that Jesus' crucifixion paid the price for sin. Individuals receive forgiveness through repentance, faith in Christ, and prayer. Some traditions, especially Catholic and Orthodox, also include confessions and absolutions through a priest. The underlying idea is that Jesus' sacrifice reconciles humans with God. And the hint, Islam and the sin and accountability. In Islam, sin works differently. Muslims believe every person is individually accountable to God or Allah, but they do not have any inherited original sin. Islam rejects the Christian concept that humanity inherits Adam's sin. Each person is responsible only for their own actions, and forgiveness comes directly from God. People seek forgiveness through repentance, prayer, good deeds, or charity. No sacrifice or mediator is required. And of course, they have that black stone over there. So there's a lot of parallels to all of this. Christianity centers forgiveness on the redemption role of Jesus. Islam emphasizes personal accountability and repentance directly to God. So, um, but Christianity began inside Judaism. That's how it all got started, right? According to these people. The earliest followers of Jesus Christ were Jews, not members of a separate religion. They worshiped at the Second Temple. They kept Jewish law. They observed Jewish festivals. They believed Jesus was the Messiah. At this stage, the movement looked more like a Jewish reform sect, not a new religion. But there was a turning point. In 7 CE, the siege of Jerusalem by the Romans destroyed the temple. This event forced major changes. Judaism reorganized around rabbinic scholarship. Christianity increasingly spread among non Jews. The two traditions gradually separated over the next few centuries. So, when Muhammad began preaching in the 600s, Arabia already had Jewish tribes, Christian communities, Arab monotheists, traditional polytheist religions. Islam emerged in conversation with those traditions. In Islamic scripture, the Quran references many early biblical figures and stories known in the region. So, yeah, in the beginning, they were both one, right? Kind of suspicious in my mind, but hey, that's just me, right? So, early Islam's relationship with Jews and Christians. Early Muslims referred to Jews and Christians as people of the book. The Quran recognizes earlier revolutions, including the Torah and the Gospel. Islam teaches that Muhammad's message continued the same monotheistic tradition while correcting what it views as theological deviations. So yes, they have a lot of early practices. The Christians and the early Muslims, they both fasted, they both did charity, they both did daily prayer, they both did pilgrim traditions. The Christians had Jerusalem and the Muslims had Mecca. These similarities reflect shared religious culture across the Near East. But over centuries, several forces deepened differences. They had theological debates, political conflicts between empires, development of separate legal systems, cultural and linguistic changes. By the medieval period, Christianity and Islam had distinct identities, even though their historical roots remained connected. So, Christianity and Islam are not completely separate religious inventions. They are branches of the same larger Abrahamic religious family tree, shaped by different historical contexts. See, I believe this is all just a big cut and paste operation, but you'll have to believe for yourself. So, why do these religions sound familiar? Or I would say cut and paste, right? The main reason is that they developed in sequence in the same geographic and cultural region. Judaism formed in the ancient Near East. Christianity emerged within Jewish communities in the first century. Islam appeared in the 7th century in Arabia, where Jewish and Christian ideas were already circulating. Because of that sequence, later traditions naturally inherit stories, concepts, and figures from earlier ones, or they get cut and pasted, however you choose to look at it, right? For example, for example, all three traditions share narratives about figures like Abraham, Moses, and Jesus Christ. But Jesus Christ was known in Islam as Isa Ibu Maryam. So, religions often develop similarly to language or legal systems, or so they say, right? New movements interpret older traditions. Communities adapt beliefs to new political and social contexts. Over time, those reinterpretations become distinct religions. Christianity, for example, reinterpreted Jewish expectations about the Messiah. Islam later presented itself as restoring the original monotheistic message given to earlier prophets. But these similarities can feel engineered to me. Several features make the overlap striking. The shared prophets and stories. You think they'd come up with their own stories, wouldn't you? Similar ethical teachings, common end time ideas. Yeah, they stuck with the same what's going to happen in the end together, right? And they have similar rituals, prayer, fasting, and charity. But historians generally attribute this to cultural continuity rather than deliberate design. Well, I attribute it to deliberate design, so I'll stand on this hill all on my own. So, religious education is usually internal. Most believers learn their own traditions' teachings, but rarely study the others in detail. And this is to pay attention to. Most believers learn their own traditions' teachings, but rarely study the others in detail. For example, Christians study the Bible, Muslims study the Quran, Jews study the Torah and related texts. But comparative studies of the other traditions is uncommon outside universities or interfaith programs. So, religions gradually build distinct identities. Communities emphasize the differences because those differences help define who belongs, who does not, and who makes their tradition unique. Over centuries, they can overshadow the shared roots. Historical conflicts have shaped how people see the religions. For example, the Crusades, the Arab Israel conflict, conflicts between empires with different dominant religions. These political struggles often make religions appear more opposed than they are theologically. Or that is just a bunch of BS and they really all came from the same root, right? I mean, you can dress this up however you want, but it can also go the other way, right? Even though the religions share the roots, their scriptures developed in different languages. Well, big deal, right? So they came up with different languages for the same scriptures, right? The Judaisms use Hebrew, Christians use Greek, and the Islam use Arabic. Over centuries, those logistical and cultural differences create separate intellectual traditions. When historians and comparative religion scholars study the traditions side by side, they often highlight that the three religions share belief in one God, prophetic traditions, moral law, final judgment, and reverence for figures such as Abraham, Moses, and Jesus Christ, who is recognized in Islam as the Isa ibn Maryam. Because of these common elements, scholars often describe them as three branches of the same Abrahamic religious family. The traditions are close enough to share many ideas, yet different enough to form distinct identities. That combination can create strong debates between communities that actually share a great deal of intellectual ancestry. Well, and not to mention that when they broke up the Middle East, when they broke up Africa, they just threw the borders to the air. So whoever lived within those areas just got kind of scrambled all over the place. And I need to take a break right now, but I'll be back with how this eye fits into all of this all seeing eye that is all over the place. Be back on the other side. Okay. In this segment, I'm going to be talking about some more of these symbols and also the laws about um, incest and rape. That RAIN group that I was mentioning in the first segment, I didn't say who they were. RAIN, RAINN, means rape and incest group. So it's a huge deal that they're involved with the DOD, but I'll get back to that later. So, anyway, let's keep talking a little bit about these birds. There's some confusion over phoenix birds or eagle birds and all that. So let me try to unscramble some of that here. In ancient Greek and Egypt mythology, the phoenix is a mythical bird associated with the Egyptian sun god Ra and the Greek god Philebos Apollo. It is a symbol of death and resurrection. And according to this book, 33-degree Freemason, the phoenix will rise again. Quote is this: Barbara Walker, in her occult book, Now is the Dawning, wrote that Egyptians believed that the phoenix was a representation of a god who rose to heaven in the form of a morning star, like Lucifer, after his fire immolation of death and rebirth. The pyramid should also be seen as a symbol of the Babylonian kingdom standing its last ground against Jesus Christ, the Son God. Their final goal will be to unite all the nations under the New World Order of the beast as described in Revelation 17. And this is talking about the phoenix, the pyramid, and the all seeing eye. The combination of the phoenix, the pyramid, and the all seeing eye is more than chance or coincidence. There is only one possible origin for these symbols, and that is the secret societies which came to this country 150 years before the Revolutionary War. Most of the patriots who achieved American independence belonged to these societies and derived their inspiration, courage, and high purpose from the ancient teaching. There can be no question that the Great Seal was directly inspired by these orders of the human quest, and that it set forth the purpose of this nation as a purpose was seen and known to the founding fathers. The phoenix represents the dying god that rises from the ashes and completes the capstone of the Illuminati pyramid. It is the Antichrist New World Order taking over the nations. Manly P. Hall describes that dying god and the pyramid in his book, The Secret Teachings of All Ages. The phoenix of Bruna, or Bunnu, is believed to be a divine bird going back to Egypt. This phoenix destroys itself in flames and then rises from the ashes. Most occultists believe that the phoenix is a symbol of Lucifer, who was cast down in flames and who one day will rise triumphant. This belief also relates to the rising of Haram Abif, the Masonic Christ. So, in this other book by Manly P. Hall, the book is called The Lost Keys of Freemasonry. It says this: there were the immortals to whom the term phoenix was applied, and their symbol was the mysterious two-headed bird now called an eagle. A familiar and little understood Masonic emblem. And that is very true. Look at those two-headed birds. You will notice that the birds have a little taller neck than actual eagles do. And that's my interpretation of it, but you'll have to check for yourself. But yeah, those double headed eagles that we think are eagles are really phoenixes because that neck is too long. And that's my understanding, but if I find out differently, I'll certainly let you know. So, according to the Forbidden Knowledge website, the double headed eagle is probably the most easily recognizable Masonic symbol in the world, even more important than the square and compass. So, the number 33 and the phoenix. The 33 is the highest level of their Masonic orders. The number 33 is of great importance in Freemasonry and in the Kabbalah system of mystical numbers. It can be found in many instances in Masonic lore. For example, consider the number 33. The first Temple of Solomon stood for 33 years in its pristine splendor. At the end of that time, it was pillaged by the Egyptian king Shishka, and finally it was completely destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar and the people of Jerusalem. And the people of Jerusalem were led into captivity to Babylon. Also, King David ruled for 33 years in Jerusalem. The Masonic order is divided into 33 symbolic degrees. There are 33 segments in the human spinal column, and Jesus was crucified in the 33rd year of his life. Alchemy is a threefold art. Its mystery well symbolized by a triangle. Its symbol is 3 times 3. 3 elements or processes in 3 worlds or spheres. The 3 times 3 is part of the mystery of the 33 degree of Freemasonry. For 33 is 3 times 3, which is 9, the number of esoteric man and the number of emanations from the root of the divine tree. The phoenix bird of ancient Egypt was changed into the Masonic eagle, and then Pike admits that the eagle is the symbol of the sun god and the god of Mendes, both being common symbols to represent Satan. Phoenix was a mythological creature with origins in Phoenician ancient folklore. It was a large bird, much like an eagle. Depictions through the times have transformed it into looking as an eagle. The symbol of the bird of Phoenix, or the eagle, is really as a symbol that represents Lucifer rising from hell, taking over earth and heaven. The phoenix is a symbol excuse me, the phoenix is a symbol of control through destruction and rebuilding. I did a show about this, but I'm going to key this to this show here because I did it a long time ago. So today I'm trying to pull these things into context. The eye of providence, or the all-seeing eye, is a symbol depicting an eye as an eyeball, EYE, often enclosed in a triangle and surrounded by rays of light or a halo intended to represent providence, as the eye watches over the workers of mankind. A well known example of the eye of providence appears on the reverse of the Great Seal of the United States, which is depicted on the United States $1 bill. It also features prominently atop the original publication of France's Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen. Today, Masons associate the Eye of Providence with their organization as a distinctive symbol. In 1797, this symbol officially became part of the iconography standards of Freemasonry in England for the first time and emerged around the world. In this group, the all-seeing eye is justified as the eye of divine surveillance, always watching over humanity. It serves as a reminder of the belief that the thoughts and actions of a Mason are constantly under the supervision and control of the Creator. Notably, many Masons often refer to Moses as the great architect. So, Freemasonry adopted the symbol in the 18th century of the all seeing eye, representing the great architecture of the universe and moral accountability. However, the eye was already circulating in Christian art before widespread Masonic adoption. From the early 1780s, the all seeing eye symbol, similar to the symbols of other European countries during the same period, namely England and France, was chosen as the Great Seal of the United States and officially recognized. In a way, this emblem was seen as an indicator of Masonic influence in the foundation of the United States, and, on the other hand, as a representative of Britain's power in its continuity. After a while, Congress presented an alternative design on the back of the $1 bill, which was the pyramid and the Eye of Providence. This became the most iconic representation of the all seeing eye. In ancient Egypt, the title Horus, Horus, was used for several pharaohs and gods, the most famous of which was Horus, son of Isis. After his father's death, Horus fought his uncle Seth and ascended the throne. He lost his eyes during the battle, which was later restored with the help of a god called Thoth. This is how Horus's eye became a symbol of repelling catastrophe and sickness, while also being a spell against devils and dangers, making it one of the most important symbols of ancient Egypt and earning it the names eagle-like god or the eagle Horus. The symbol of an eagle was considered one of the prominent characteristics of a god, excuse me, the symbol of an eagle was considered one of the prominent characteristics a god could have and was depicted as an eagle sitting on a branch watching the world. The eye known as the Eye of Horus or the Egyptian eye is referred to as the Eye of Providence. In many surviving depictions from ancient Egypt, it is a combination of a human eye and a falcon. The darkened eyebrow and the cheek of the bird represent the head of an eagle. When the Egyptian state formed around 3100 BC, the falcon was already linked to royal authority. One of the earlier artifacts, the Namner palette, shows a falcon representing the god Horus, the divine protector of the king. In the carving, Horus appears as a falcon dominating an enemy territory symbolized by papyrus plants. This imagery essentially says the king rules because Horus conquers for him. So, and the pharaoh's name literally sits under a falcon. Egyptian kings use a symbol called a serek. That's Serekh. A serek was a palace facade representing the royal house. Above it sat a falcon representing Horus. This meant the king ruled as the earthly embodiment of Horus. The king's official titles included the Horus name. From the beginning of Egyptian civilization, falcons were the state authority. Some people believe the Eye of Providence is an all seeing eye that has unlimited access to us. They believe it represents God watching over everything and seeing everything. However, in Satanism, the eye, which is wide open and surrounded by light, represents the third eye that allows you to see the truth. And Joe Rogan has that third eye right there on his logo. None of this stuff is hiding. I'll keep reading. In the visually rendered graphic representations that most of us have seen in the galaxy, we usually just think of Saturn as a planet with rings around it. Though most people don't realize it, the Roman Catholic Church entails much Saturn worship in its rituals. Roman Catholic priests traditionally wear black robes with a cube like square on the collar. Both the color black and the cube are symbols of Saturn. The Saturn cube is derived from the planet's north pole, called the six pointed star. The cube is a three-dimensional representation of the two-dimensional hexagonal North Pole six-pointed star. Saturn is portrayed esoteric mythology as our original sun, where it was fixed on the heavens at Earth's celestial north, and from where it watched over the ancients like the all-seeing eye of God. The Greek name for Saturn is Chronos, which also means time. The Brotherhood of Saturn was a magic ordered cult founded by Eugene Grosch in Germany in 1926 that was the first to incorporate Saturnarian symbolism into its practices that created the link between Saturn and Satan. Not that long ago, 1926 Germany, right? Starting to sound a little bit more suspicious here. In modern times, the same crescent shape, and I've talked about this crescent shape, the crescent shape on all those Middle Eastern flags and stuff, it's all satanic. So, in modern times, the same crescent shape has found its way into the Great Seal of the United States, in the symbol of the House of Windsor and the symbol for the United Nations. Multiple corporations such as Bentley and Microsoft's Internet Explorer utilize the crescent in their logos as well. In addition to the eye and the crescent, another common symbol that has come to embody strong satanic connotations is the cube. That cube they walk around over in Mecca. Sheriff, that's Sheriff, and we call them sheriffs today, is the ancient Egyptian, was a lawgiver, and his badge was always a six-pointed star, which is a symbol of Saturn. U.S. sheriffs in the Wild West up to today still wear the six-pointed star. It is interesting that Saturn's symbol is a six-pointed star. Saturn is the sixth planet from the sun. Saturn Day or Saturday is the sixth day of the week. And now NASA is receiving images of the Saturn hexagon, six-sided. The sixth chakra of the human energy system is the third eye or our pineal gland. When your third eye chakra opens, you develop your sixth sense of intuition and spirituality. From a consciousness perspective, the sixth sense, your intuition's hunches, are messengers of God, your guardian angels. Now, I don't believe that part is true because I believe very much in all these intuitive things, but the part about them being God and our guardian angels, no, that comes straight out of the New Age stuff. So be careful what you accept. And I'll keep reading here, but isn't it interesting that angels have halos and rings around their head, and Saturn is the only planet with a halo ring around it? Yeah, there's something about those angels. The ancient name of Saturn was, as mentioned, El. It is the reason why those that were chosen by El were called the elites. The gods of Elohim are angels, the messengers of God. When witches cast a spell, or spell, they put a hex, which is the number 6, on someone. And when chefs deep fry something, they deep six it. It is the elites who run the world today. Elites come from the Israelites, which come from the Egyptian worship of the moon, Isis, the sun, Ra, and Saturn, Elohim, hence Israel. So, in Islamic tradition, the rock is where Mohammed ascended to heaven, accompanied by the angel Gabriel. So, you got the angel in there, right? We're talking about Mohammed, the guy that did the Quran. Rome was known as the Romans, as Saturnia, not Rome, and Saturn was one of their gods. So, Rome was known to the Romans as Saturnia, not Rome, and Saturn was one of their gods. Black is both Saturn's color and Satan's color. The Black Holy Bible tells us Satan is 666. Saturn is the sixth planet. Its symbol is a six-pointed star. It supposedly has hexagon weather formations. And Saturn Day, or Saturday, the sixth day, is Ozzy Osbourne's Black Sabbath. So the city of Rome, according to quite a few people, was originally known as Saturnalia, or City of Saturn, just like Christmas is really a takeoff of Saturnalia. The Roman statesman and philosopher Marcus Cicero called Saturn phaenon, a word meaning shining. Saturn is where we get our name for Saturday, and Saturnalia was a popular holiday festival from December 17th until December 23rd, which celebrated the Romans' favorite agriculture god, which included gluttonous feastings, drunkenness, gambling, public nudity, and orgies. Sounds just like our people, doesn't it? To the early ancient Romans, Saturn was a god of time and traditionally depicted as Father Time, a wise old man with a long gray beard holding a harvesting sickle, which is also representation of death. This later gave birth to the concept of the Grim Reaper, which is represented today as a skeleton dressed in a black hooded robe holding a sickle. The black robe is a symbol of an initiative of Saturn. In the visually rendered graphic representation that most of us have seen of the galaxy, we usually just think of Saturn as a planet with rings around it. Judges and Roman Catholic priests also traditionally wore black robes. Judges have a Masonic hammer or gavel when they hit to declare the word of law. The idea of law comes from the biblical 10 stone commandments, and so it is said that you break the law. Judges always sit on a 3-tier high platform representing the first 3 degrees of Freemasonry. It is the same Trifer, Tritier platform is found at Congress, and the altar of most Catholic and Protestant churches is 3 tiers high. It is also why you give someone the third degree. Hey, don't give me the third degree about this. I don't know anymore. So, the third degree related to the third degree of Masonry, where the initiative is asked a series of probing questions he must correctly answer in order to become a master Mason. Then the judge takes a recess because he is in court playing a game of 10 commandments with lawyers who play the dialectic protagonist-antagonist game, bouncing the advantage into each other's courts. In the courtroom, witnesses must place their hand on the Old New Testament before giving their testimony, just as a priest's sermon is called testimony. As a witness swears in, one hand is placed on the Bible while the other is held up. In church, when parishioners feel the Holy Spirit, often during a song, they will hold up one or both hands to praise the Lord. Then, when you get further into Saturn, you begin to understand that his color is black and that he was a god of one of the many different Semitic tribes or groups, and one of his symbols was a square. Then you get into the square black mortarboard that the university or high school students wear when they Graduate. It is a square on its head and is usually black, the color of Saturn, one of the ancient Hebrew gods. This is the same black used on the robe the judges wear when he is going to throw you in jail. Because the black represents Saturn, Saturn is the old Semitic god. As for the black cube, judges, degrees, and Saturn, here are some informative from various sources. Jordan Maxwell said under Matrix of Power, when you graduate from high school, you come out professionally with a black robe, which is black for Saffron, the god of the Hebrews, requiring that you wear the square mortarboard on top of your head. The square mortarboards are, of course, used by the Freemasons for their plaster. So that is why you wear a square mortarboard when you graduate, ultimately becoming an Illumini. Illumini, yeah. It has to do with Freemasonry. It has to do with control of education in this country. First, you pay out your tuition to get into university, where they strip you of your intuition and give you an indoctrination. Then you receive a Master's Masonic degree while wearing a Masonic mortarboard cap and cult of Saturn black robes to become an alumni or alumni. Graduation means to increment or retard progress. As Jordan Maxwell says, the true meaning of graduation is gradual indoctrination. In the visually rendered graphic representation that most of us have seen of the galaxy, we just think of Saturn as a planet with rings around it. Though most people don't realize it, the Roman Catholic Church entails much Saturn worship in the rituals. Roman Catholic priests traditionally wear black robes with a cube-like square on the collar. Both the color black and the cube are symbols of Saturn. The Saturn cube is derived from the planet's north pole called the six-pointed star. Saturn is portrayed as our original sun, where it was fixed in the heavens as Earth's celestial north, and from where it is watched over the ancients like the all-seeing eye of God. Mankind's earthly experience can be broken up into golden, silver, bronze, and iron epochs of the ages of man. Today, we are said to live in the Iron Age of industry and technology. Before that, a Bronze Age of heroic mythology existed, preceded by a Silver Age born out of the chaos that ended the greatest ages of the mythical paradise known as the Golden Age. Saturn rules over the period from the middle of December to the middle of February, which encompasses the houses of Capricorn and Aquarius in the zodiac and has power in Libra, wherein he receives his exaltation over the dragon, the ass, the lapwing, the cuttlefish, and the mole over the metal lead, the precious stone onyx. Saturn is the under the power of the number 3 in arithmetic and geometric figure of the triangle. Both Islam and Judaism have strong Saturnial elements in them. In Islam, it is revealed that the book of the Quran has all sorts of rules and limitations for its adherents, especially for women. Women must dress up in black, Saturnine robes, cannot show their faces, cannot drive, and are subject to honor killings, rapes, etc. Men aren't allowed to drink alcohol. They have to pray to Mecca 5 times a day. In Judaism, we have the Old Covenant, in which Jehovah made with various patriarchs, which gave us the law and strict kosher laws on what they can and cannot eat. They cannot work on the Shabbat, which is Saturn's day, and must get circumcised. Both religions are very restrictive and binding. They are not inherently evil. Well, depends on who you think about. They are not inherently evil or sinister, but excessively obstructive and controlling. Well, I think that kind of defines evil, but perhaps this is why the Apostle Paul describes the Jewish law in terms of being a curse in his letters. The hexagram, or the six-pointed star, is the seal of Solomon, or nowadays known as the Star of David, right there on the Israel flag. It is also known as a talisman of Saturn in Kabbalistic sources. In modern strands of Satanism, including Thelema, black robes are often worn in magical rituals and initiation ceremonies. Indeed, there are various satanic Luciferian spells and rituals with strong Saturnarian elements in them. In the Testament of Solomon, King Solomon used the seal or ring of Sabbath given by Michael the archangel to command demons or the jinn to do his bidding and even torture them. If the seal if the seal is imbued with Saturnial powers, it makes sense it can be used to bind spirits in some manner. In many sources, the chief symbol of Saturn is the cube. This relates to the Kaaba stone of Islam as well as the foundational stone in Jewish creation myths, which in turn relates to the myths associated with the Holy Grail and the Philosopher's Stone. The Nazi named Otto Rahm, Rahm, supposedly claimed he had found the Holy Grail that once belonged to the Cathars. According to Tarotokia, the cube's design also forms. The cube is the base of the Platonic solids, and when turned and viewed from the right angle, its edges form a hexagon. This is where the idea of someone being hexed comes from. We can take hex to basically mean bind or bound. When one puts a hex on someone, they're all really doing is putting them in a box. You can positively hex someone by wishing them health and abundance, but negatively hexing is done through things like gossip, which one defines another person's space as having only certain negative and destructive qualities. One essentially builds this box of reality around the targeted individual, and celebrities are all too aware of this form of binding magic as certain trivialities of their personal lives become endlessly repeated and turn back in on themselves in this thing called the Chamber of Secrets style reporting that is spread as far and wide as possible. This meaningless white noise has served to obstruct and drown the utter holiness of the Saturn's cube, itself being the chamber of prayer and sacred emulation. In that case, Judaism developed as a cult that began to worship Yahweh exclusively and gradually usurped competing religious cults. This is how, like much Jupiter, betrays his father as well as fellow Olympians. For example, El, a Semitic word used by Jews for Yahweh, was also used by Canaanites as another name for Baal. That's Baal. It is a clear case for the Israelite adoption of names founding in pre existing religions. Yeah, and I already talked about this House of Windsor and all this stuff. But anyway, the planet Saturn, the Nazi Party were the most Saturnalian brotherhood of war and destruction. They always knew Saturn had rings, the Lord of the Rings. Saturn is the god of the underworld. From that, we get the dark side of the Force, Darth Vader. Remember Darth Vader with his Nazi helmet speaking through his Masonic triangle. Saturn is the lord of the black robes. Judges, priests, Rabbis, kids graduate from high school wear black robes. This god Saturn was referred to as El. If you continue today to worship the planet Saturn, you become known as an elder. You get elected. With elections, you're now one of the elites. You got elevated. So, and then I'm gonna get into this Prophet Muhammad business now, and I would like to caution you here, okay? There's a lot of talk about this Prophet Muhammad, okay? The guy who wrote the Quran and all that stuff, who's very worshipped in that part of the world. Well, I think, well, let me just scroll down here and I'll tell you. There are reports that the Prophet Muhammad was betrothed, in other words, married to a girl named Aisha bint Abi Bakr at the age of 6, and the marriage was consumed when she was 9 years old. These narratives have historically been accepted in mainstream Sunni scholarship, but it's not universally accepted today. Today, they're saying, well, maybe she was 6. Yeah, maybe she was 9. I don't know. Looked a little further. Yeah, maybe she was a teenager. And then they also say, well, things were different back then. So that is the reality. The person that all this in the Quran and all this stuff is gauged around was a man who married a child, right? I mean, you can toss this dice however you want to throw it, but it seems like a pretty clear fact, at least according to them and their own historians, right? So it's a touchy subject, is what I'm going to say. People people basically don't want to talk about it, is what I'm trying to say. Um, because we're going to get into some of these laws and stuff. In Islamic law, developed age of consent standards are based on puberty, but modern Muslim majority states operate under civil law frameworks with defined age thresholds. So, ancient Judaism, according to places like the Talmud, that place that talks about raping kids and stuff, it discusses marriageable ages around puberty, 12 to 13 for girls, but betrothals could occur earlier. And there's no reliable historical record that figures like Moses or other prophets married children, but early marriage norms were common in the region. And that's where I think this history gets a little bit twisted around because they can always say, well, raping children, I mean, sure, it's a bad thing, but look at what they did back then. They did it worse back then. Those people are the real criminals. We never would have thought about it if it hadn't been for them. It doesn't, I mean, really, it doesn't excuse a single thing in my book, but that is where they write up these history books and stuff because that you got somebody to blame, right? Hey, I didn't think about this stuff. It's been going on for a million years. How do you expect me to stop it? Yeah, yeah. So the Talmud talks about 12 to 13 for girls. Early Christianity, there was no evidence that Jesus married. Um, and according to the medieval Christian Europe, girls could legally marry at 12 under canon law. Royal and noble marriages often involved very young brides. Um, the Hindus, yeah, everybody had their thing with marrying the kids because they write the history, right? Well, gee, my family did a lot of horrible things. They married kids. So let me when I write this history book, I'll just say that everybody did it, right? That's the excuse a child does, right? These people are very childlike in their behaviors, right? Their minds are frozen in a childlike because most of the elites were horrifically abused as children themselves. So my opinion is that is why you see them acting like little children the way they talk about each other. Hey, did you see what so and so did over there? Hey, I just logged on to do a show to tell you. Did you see what Donald Trump just said? And those Republicans, and then there's the Democrats, and then there's this, there's that. So most of them behave like they're children, and I believe that behavior comes from the fact that as minor children, they themselves were abused, so their personalities get frozen in that time space. So this thing with Muhammad is a really huge deal. So I mean no harm. I'm just trying to state what really went on. So does that make Muhammad a really great guy? Well, I would say no, right? But hey, I don't join any religion, so not up to me to say. But it makes for a compelling story, right? If the guy that you're worshiping and praying to 5 times a day and doing all this stuff, well, and he married a child, doesn't that kind of change your opinion just a little tiny bit here? So, yeah. And then we have also created by the same Islamic group, the temporary marriages. I talked about this years ago. In Islamic, there are two major positions. What they say is this: the Sunnis say, well, temporary marriages is considered prohibited. Sunni scholars hold that it was briefly allowed in early Islam and then permanently banned. Why was it briefly allowed in the first place, right? And then we have the Shias. And what do they say? Well, they say temporary marriage or mutah is considered permissible under specific conditions: fixed duration, agreed compensation, mutual consent, no inheritance rights, no automatic financial maintenance obligations. So it is legal, like in Iran, under Sharia law and doctrinally permitted in Shia's jurisprudence elsewhere. So, yeah, okay, well, you can say, well, what do you mean? Why are you blaming me? They've been doing it for a long time. Look over there, they're doing it there. Why can't we do it over here? See, it just throws up this huge, weird cycle. And the bottom line is this: you're still raping children, right? We got that part straight. No matter what century you're talking, you're still talking, well, my people raped children until the 15th century, and then they changed. Uh, I think you got to be careful how you're describing yourself, if you ask me. But anyway, so there are there documented cases of abuse? Yes, of course there are. Poor or vulnerable girls are pressured into temporary marriages. Families arrange it under economic distress. Girls did not fully understand the arrangement. It functioned in practice as a cover for sexual exploitation. So what happens is that human rights organizations have criticized how temporary marriage can be misused, especially involving minors. You don't think so, right? Just because their brains are completely formed. Yeah, of course it is. They say that not all temporary marriages involve minors. That's also very true. And not all clerics involved are arranging them. Abuse cases are region specific. So, in Iran, for example, legal marriage age for girls has historically been low, 13. Temporary marriage allows the same legal framework. This creates vulnerability. The vulnerability arises from poverty, legal loopholes, weak enforcement, and gender power imbalance. Muslim clerics are involved in this. What they do is this: that if you pay them, they will issue what's called a temporary marriage permit. That allows the person buying the permit to live with this girl and have sex with this girl as if they were married. The girls misinterpret this. They're not smart enough. They're not educated. They just don't know. They're trying to escape extreme poverty, and somebody says, "Hey, I'll marry you and take you out of this." Well, they don't understand that it is a temporary marriage, right? So basically what happens, they have sex with the girls get tossed out, the man just disappears overnight. The girls have no idea this was a trick and a setup. And then, of course, the family then disowns them. So the girl then has no choice but to become a prostitute. See how full circle? And this is because of those Muslim clerics. So I don't have a axe to grind against the Muslim clerics, but I do, in a lot of terms, have an axe to grind against them. This is not right, and is still going on right now. So how do you support that Quran and these clerics when this is right now documented and in effect going on? And this has happened in lots of other cases. lots of other cases. This is how they learn to how they operate. And then what they want to do is act like every Muslim is out to rape your kids and have these. It is not true of every single Muslim, but it is the reality of what the Quran and those clerics and those black robes are doing, because I believe they have all been converted to Satanism. Call it what you want. That's what I call it. So I have a lot of details down below. I've talked about this endlessly. And yeah, of course, the UN's trying to stop it and blah, 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 blah. We're trying to change the age of consent, blah, 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 blah. Well, not how it works. We're going to talk in real time here today. When you're living in a village and somebody's getting raped in your village, and that person raping them is a cleric, a priest, or anybody from the UN, they're operating with pure immunity. They have already rigged the law when they land in your country. It has already been rigged, so they will not have any cases brought against them. They will rape whoever they want in those countries because it is allowed in those countries, and everyone looks the other way. Why? Because they want to keep getting that white, filthy, evil money. That is why everybody looks the other way, because if you don't look the other way, well, you're going to get kicked out and you're going to get killed. So I think that looking the other way is a pretty serious way to also be involved in, actually, you might as well just do it yourself, right? You're looking the other way. You're not helping these kids. You're going to be as responsible as these other people, because looking the other way doesn't mean you kind of escape the crime, right? Oh, I saw it, but I didn't do anything about it. There's a saying going around. They say, if you see something, say something. I'd like to add to that, do something too. Don't just say something, do something, take a position. Well, I saw 100 kids get raped today, but I'm not going to do anything because I got to keep my job as more of the atmosphere that we're living into, right? So, yeah, so this whole uh, kids getting married because these clerics and stuff, yeah, still going on right this second. Exactly right this second. So let me add to the fun here of this rain business. RAINN. They operate the DOD Safe Helpline. You heard me right. RAIN, which stands for Rape Incest, runs the Department of Defense Safe Helpline under contract with the DOD's Sexual Assault Prevention and Response Office. It is just talk about and flipped upside down work. This is not just a partnership. RAIN is a contracted service provider for the military's confidential support line for survivors. That means active duty, veterans, and families. The Safe Helpline is a DoD mandated service, and RAIN provides live support, online messaging, and tailored military specific guidance. This means the DoD is effectively a major institutional client, far beyond a typical training engagement. So, there was a RAIN audit that explicitly states that its DoD contract made up a very large portion of its total revenue. The Department of Defense contract represented 31% of total revenue in years 2023 and 23% in 2022. So you got a huge, huge client called RAIN. They're against rape and incest, and they're your biggest client. And they say to you, keep it quiet. What are you going to do? What are you going to do? Well, if you're a creep like these people, you're going to keep it quiet. That is the single client contributing nearly 1/3 of RAIN's income. It is unusual for a nonprofit that is also supposed to be a broad national advocate. This level of dependency can create powerful incentives around maintaining that relationship on both sides. Despite the size of this contract, RAIN does not publicly disclose the contract details, such as the full contract scope, length, total value, or specific deliverables on its website or its annual reports. The nonprofit's public disclosures in IRS Forms 990 summarizes typically. I can confirm that RAIN appears in official DoD contract vendor list. RAIN also receives federal funds from the Department of Justice Office for Victims of Crime. These are much smaller than the DoD contract. It participates in multiple federally funded programs, not merely one-off donations. RAIN's public policy role, because RAIN is positioned as a national anti-sexual assault authority. It regularly advocates with Congress on survivor legislation, supporting reauthorization acts like the Debbie Smith Act. RAIN pushes political policy changes for reporting, tracking, and training around forensic evidence and victim services. Now, I can't say this for a fact, but why couldn't I find anything bad being said about RAIN? Well, let me just put it to you bluntly. If you are the largest contractor, being the DoD, with a group called RAIN, which is about incest and rape, okay? Rape of men, women, and children, and incest. And your biggest customer is the DoD. You don't think they don't have a staff somewhere that monitors some things? Like, for example, they probably have some staff somewhere that monitors things. Somebody is likely assigned to RAIN. Anybody says a word about RAIN and that position gets flagged and taken down, boom, they're gone. I would say that would be plausibly very, very plausible because they run the thing, right? The government prints the money. They come up with the laws and the rules. You think they can't zap negative comments about RAIN? Of course they can. I could not find anyone saying a peep against RAIN, okay? Not even a casual mention about them. Maybe I'm the first person that stumbled on this. Maybe that's probably likely more the case. Probably nobody else has stumbled on this deal. We used to have this saying back in the 90s about, well, that really caught my hair on fire. This blazed my whole head on fire. The fact that RAIN had this dual role where the control of the narrative comes from. RAIN has both the ear of lawmakers and deep institutional relationships. So, RAIN is also highly dependent on a single federal contract with the DoD. No public detailed breakdown of that contract. Couldn't find a word about it anywhere. And I searched and I searched and I searched. Political advocacy. RAIN simultaneously shapes policy and implements big government mandates. So, this is exactly the structure that can lead to this. Stakeholders inwardly prioritize maintaining government relationships over pushing more disruptive reforms. Critics inside and outside the movement worry that survival instincts of an institution might temper criticism of major institutional partners, including governments or military. Internal staff or survivors may feel that organizational narratives sometimes shift more toward preserving funding or contracts than towards grassroots priorities. So yes, people basically, if they figured out this rain deal, they would probably be a little bit worried to report it, right? Because because of who they hang around with, right? Hey, the same creep has been in charge of this group for 30 years. Same guy in charge for 30 years. Same office in Washington, D.C. So there is no indicated from audited financial statements or public findings. There is nothing to indicate that RAIN has been accused of illegal contact tied to the DoD contract itself. The DoD contract terms have not been publicly leaked or described in full. Nobody knows what's in them. And there's also a legal prohibition against advocacy by a nonprofit doing government advocacy work. So The level of dependency and lack of contract transparency is notable, especially for an organization claiming to be a grassroots advocate as well as a government partner. So, the National Sexual Assault Hotline comes under the DoD. The DoD contracts that alone with RAIN. They provide RAIN with 30% of their total revenue. That means there's regular engagement on legislation affecting sexual violence response, but they do not publicly list contract details or institutional clients. So RAIN receives roughly 30% of its revenue from a DoD contract in 2023. I just looked at 2023 to kind of give us a basis here. The DoD oversees the military justice system. The DoD has faced repeated criticism over handling sexual assault. The DoD operates global installations, including child care facilities. So the question becomes this: can an organization financially dependent on the DoD be fully independent when handling survivor calls involving DoD systems? A true conflict would require evidence of something like hotline staff discouraging reports. Well, they're not going to do any of this stuff, right? Because if you're the biggest financer of this RAN group, hang on here a second. RAINE, the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network, or RAIN, is an American nonprofit anti sexual assault organization, the largest in the United States. RAIN operates the National Sexual Assault Hotline, as well as the Department of Defense Safe Helpline, and carries out programs to prevent sexual assault, help survivors, and ensure that perpetrators are brought to justice through victim services, public education, public policy, and consulting services. RAIN was founded in 1994 by Scott Berkowitz with initial funding from the Atlantic Group and Warner Music. RAIN was founded, blah, blah, blah. After the Senate unanimously reauthorized the Debbie Smith Act in May of 2019, RAIN gathered 32,000 signatures from people. Yeah, RAIN is huge. I'm talking huge. And yeah, I would say highly, highly suspicious, right? So let me get back over here. I don't I try not to put this thing on hold because I'm having some issues and I blah 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 blah, you know the drill. So anyway, so where was I? Here with that. Okay, so anyway, um so yeah, there's nothing about them. RAIN hotline counselors, um yeah, they just take calls and hide things probably. RAIN is one of the largest sexual assault organizations in the country. That gives it public influence, media influence, congressional access, and data framing power. So, large nonprofits with major government contracts usually rely on board oversight, separate compliance divisions, confidentiality protocols, independent audits, federal contract performance reviews, and inspector general reviews oversight in the case of DoD programs. But the DoD itself is subject to inspector general review and congressional oversight on sexual assault response programs. So, and remember, they have had hearings about the Department of Defense and all their child pornography on their computers. What happened to those hearings? Well, funny you should ask. Zero happened after those hearings. So, yes, this has all been documented, and I really need to take a break. This show is going to go on for quite a while because when I come back, I want to talk a little bit more about these rain people and why I'm so suspicious of them, and then get into more of these laws about that actually legally allowed them to rape and hide what was going on with boys and the men. And I think you'll be very surprised to learn not that long ago.
Have you ever seen this symbol? It's the double-headed eagle. It's been with us, humanity, for a very long time. You can find it in English royalty. The Freemasons use it. It's actually been around for a few thousand years. But this symbol comes from an older Sumerian god called Marduk, who was described as having a double godhead, two faces facing opposite each other on the same head. That's where the symbol of the double-headed eagle comes from Marduk. I know, it sounds strange, right? It turns out it actually had to do with celestial bodies. The gods named themselves after such things. In the Sumerian mythology, Marduk is an ancient god that placed his name upon their Sumerian creation story called the Enuma Elish. I've done a video about it too, actually. By placing his name upon creation, Marduk declared himself the king of the gods. So Marduk caused a huge war because of it. It's the exact same story as the Christian Lucifer. In fact, they are the same. Except that the story of Lucifer is told in a more spiritualistic context. Here's the part that blew me away. Marduk, or Lucifer's equivalent in ancient Egyptian mythology, is Amun-Ra, the sun god, who also placed his name upon creation. Before Amun-Ra split heaven and earth, Shu and Tefnut, a god called Atum did that. There you can see him in a boat. That's Atum. It's not Amun-Ra. I've also done a video of that, and you can find that on my channel. What happened is what's called syncretism. Now, I'm not sure what happened at the end of the war with Marduk, if he died or if he was banished. I'm not quite sure. But I do know that people that followed him turned into a cult and eventually became the Freemasons, as you can see by their use of the double-headed eagle. By the way, and here's the scary part, the Freemasons had a very heavy hand in the creation of Christianity and Mormonism and Islam. It's not a coincidence that all their end times predictions are exactly the same, except from opposing points of view. It would seem that prophecy is nothing more than long-term planning, and this organization, the Freemasons, make it come to pass. Not only is Freemasonry involved in the royal families and religions, but they are also involved in the creation of governments, believe it or not. They have stretched out their tentacles all around the world. It's certainly amazing. They are the cult of Marduk, and so we say his name, but most don't know why. Amen. It doesn't just mean so be it. It's strange that in the Torah, or the Old Testament, his name was directly used after a curse. For example, you can see in Deuteronomy, for example, 27:15, "Cursed be the man that maketh any graven or molten image, an abomination unto the Lord, the works of the hands of the craftsman, and putteth it in a secret place, and all the people shall answer and say, Amen." It's a curse. In fact, if you read the rest of Deuteronomy, you'll see it's God giving commandments to people of what not to do, or if they do something, they'll be damned. That's a curse. History is written by the winner. Whoever wrote the Torah is not the same person that wrote the New Testament, the Quran, or the Book of Mormon. I know, it's hard to believe, but it is what it is. I know it's scary, what I'm saying. The name Amen is equivalent to Marduk or Lucifer. But do not be afraid, for a wise man once told me, God knows what's truly in your heart. Personally, I don't say Amen anymore. I say, thank you, God.
Okay, I am back. In this segment, I'm going to be talking about a few things. I'm going to be talking first about, is Jesus really Satan? Hold on to your hats or your Fez hats. And also, I pulled the laws from the next show about how this rape business got covered up and all of that. So I'll be discussing the laws, and actually, it's pretty alarming how recent these laws were. So, and the clip you just heard, it was titled "The Double-Headed Eagle: The Cult of Marduk." Now, the guy in the clip said God at the end, and I thought, well, let's talk about God. So I have my file about God here, and just remember, this is just my opinion, what makes sense to me. I'm sharing my work with you. I have no way to control what you think, how you do it, or what you believe. So, with that said, let me get started here. There's a group called the Nairaland Forum, Nairaland Forum, and they're out of Nigeria. I think these people are absolutely the tops as far as their research capabilities. If you want to find out more about the white trick and black people and all that, the people in Nigeria at this Nairaland Forum, they really know what they're talking about. So, I found some information from them about this, and the links, of course, will be below. I'm not going to read the entire article, just parts of it. The whole piece is really long and really, really good, so I encourage you to take a look at it. So, okay, the Bible is essentially a ripoff of the ancient Sumerian text. Many parts of the Bible are verbatim copies of the Sumerian epic of Gilgamesh, Gilgamesh. In these Sumerian texts, which existed at least 1,000 years before Genesis was written, and remember, I've talked about this in the past, the Bible got written after they already had a bunch of stories stored up, right? So it wasn't like, well, today we're going to start the Bible and we're going to start telling stories. But no, they had these stories already stored up. And so then that's how they came up with the Bible in the first place. So these texts, these Sumerian texts, existed at least 1,000 years before Genesis was written. Yahweh and Satan are basically presented as two brothers. The extraterrestrials, Enki, Enki, and Enlil, Enlil. Enki was the director of the creation of man by virtue of permission granted him by Anu, the chief ruler of the Anunnaki, Annunaki, and the father of both. So, let me start reading from this article that I found also. That's all well and good for Christians to criticize the Roman Catholic Church that they refer to as the whore of Babylon. Yet it is this same Roman Catholic Church that canonized their Bible that they regard as the unalterable Word of God. The Bible reckons exactly 66 Gospels, many of which are 100% inspired by the devil and not by God. This includes the four Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, who not only were not contemporary with Jesus, but also happened to be mere idolaters that Satan used to work out and propagate his false narrative of a Jesus Christ turned into God. And it's called The False Biblical Jesus Christ from this article. All the false gods that ever existed, such as the Greek, Roman, Hindu, Northern, Babylonian, or Egyptian gods, are just different representations of one and the same figure, that of Satan himself. Just as Satan is legion and has countless faces, so does the fake Jesus Christ, appearing to people in many forms and represented through countless faces. Notice the one-eye symbolism that normally is associated with Satan. And you can see that right there on Jesus Christ. This time it's associated with Jesus Christ because they're actually one and the same figure. When Satan will come in person on this earth as a false Jesus Christ during the end of time, he will not look like any of these faces. For Satan is elusive, and no man really knows what his true face is. The false biblical Jesus Christ is the perfect God for false believers, for he assumes responsibility for all their sins, intercedes on their behalf during Judgment Day, and grants them eternal life in heaven as long as they accept him in their heart. Only Satan can be the author of such huge lies, since God clearly says that each individual will bear his own burden and that intercession belongs exclusively to him. Satan is just lying to us and making us false promises because he knows very well that when his imposture will be exposed, it will be far too late for all those who have followed in his footsteps. The false biblical Jesus Christ even claims to grant access to paradise to those who deny him. They just have to make a short stay in purgatory beforehand. Who else but the devil to deny that hell is in fact eternal? The truth is that there is no such thing as purgatory. There is eternal paradise on one side, eternal hell on the other, and nothing in between. Purgatory is a pure invention of Satan that can also be found in Judaism and Islam. Indeed, Muslims and Jews believe that as long as they claim to be Muslims or Jews, eternal paradise is assured to them regardless of the quality and nature of their sins, even if it may require a brief stay in hell beforehand in order to atone for their sins. Satan draws men to all these false religions he created, promising them that they just have to subscribe to these beliefs in order to have the guarantee to be saved. Now, Satan knows very well that this is a pure lie, but he also knows that when the people who follow his false religion will realize it, it will be far too late for them. Another clue which indicates that the biblical Jesus Christ is actually Satan is the fact that he possesses as the first being created by God. However, it just so happens that the first being that God created is Lucifer, aka Iblis, Iblis, aka Satan, which confirms that the false biblical Jesus Christ and Satan are in reality one and the same entity. Whatever their beliefs in false biblical Jesus Christ is the ideal God for all false believers because he is actually Satan. Indeed, their hearts are naturally drawn to him, for he is the only God that they have ever known since their birth. Because they had been true believers, they would easily have realized that this false biblical Jesus Christ turned into a God is no more than Satan himself, because he quite simply preaches the opposite of what God advocates and shares almost the exact same features than his. So, in that article, the false biblical Jesus Christ and the devil is down below. It has a ton more to take a look at. So let me continue on with some more of this RAIN business. RAIN, they depend heavily on DoD contracts. The Safe Helpline contract appears to have been repeatedly renewed for all these years. Sole source awards create dependency optics. The guy Berkowitz that's in charge of this has been in power for 30 years. He is also compensated via a company he owns, and this is a weird part. Now, I don't know. He owns a company called A&I Publishing LLC. Publicly, it's described as wholly owned by Scott Berkowitz, a communication publishing entity, the vehicle which he receives compensation. So he gets his compensation through this A&I Publishing and not through RAIN. See, it's starting to get weird already, right? So the nonprofit contracts with a company owned by its own president. This is legal under nonprofit law if properly disclosed and approved by the board, but is considered a governance sensitivity. So here's how it worked. RAIN enters into a contract with A&I Publishing LLC. A&I Publishing provides executive services like Berkowitz's leadership. RAIN pays A&I Publishing. Berkowitz receives income through that entity. This means he is compensated via a vendor relationship rather than payroll. So yeah, it's a little bit odd to say the least. When compensation flows through a related LLC, watchdog groups tend to scrutinize it more closely because it creates related party transaction. It concentrates executive power. Yeah, he's been in power for 30 years, ruling on his own. So yeah, so those are that's the rest of what I have about Ray. Now, I have a lot of statistics about these laws and stuff, but I'm going to tread lightly on them because I really don't know how many of them we can trust. Because, for example, according to the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, so they're over there doing studies. So who's conducting their studies? See how it all could get really fishy here? They claim that more than 57,000 children reported being sexually abused, and that's on the low end, since about a third of the cases get reported. And where's this come from? And what's more, males are even less likely to report sexual abuse than females. And then they say research indicates that about 1 in 6 boys will be sexually abused by the time of 18. And yeah, and I've been watching on YouTube, I've been watching testimony of male rape victims, and it's very, very interesting to hear their side of the story because they're also quoting these 1 in 5 and 1 in 6 studies. And I don't know where they're getting this stuff from. But then there's also the Crimes Against Children Research Center at the University of New Hampshire. They report that 90% of these boys will likely know the person who is sexually abusing them. And according to RAIN, or the Rape, Abuse, and Incentive National Network, about a third of the sexual perpetrators are family members. And about 60% are see, this is just almost too screwy to try to deal with, right? Because I mean, I don't believe a word these people have said. Um, Another potential reason males may not report being victims is stereotypes that exist in our culture. Yes, that is a big, probably the leading reason. As a society, we have done a huge disservice to boys by instilling stereotypes like that big boys don't cry and sending the message they should just suck it up and be strong. Or even worse, they need to man up. According to these false beliefs, men are supposed to be tough and brave, and they're supposed to have a strong sex drive. Media, literature, schools, community establishments, like places of worship, and even family members can reinforce stereotypical messages and paint a fictitious picture of how boys are supposed to behave. And here again, research indicates that male sex abuse survivors not only have few resources available to them, but they also face greater stigma than female survivors. Yeah, I looked this up quite a while ago. I found one place, count them, one place in Texas that had enough beds for, I think it was 10 or 20 men. So if you're a man suffering from abuse, where are you going to go, right? There are no services for you. So I'm going to read a few of these statistics, but like I said, don't really think we should be trusting them. And see, this is another one. All these victims themselves are saying, well, it's 1 out of 5 for the boys and 1 out of 4 for the girls. And then here we have 1 in 25 boys could be sexually abused before they turn 18, according to a review of child sex abuse prevalence studies. Well, yeah, 10% of rape survivors are male, according to RAIN. Now, I totally disagree. I would probably venture to say, I would venture this. I would say that men and boys are getting raped more often than women, not less. And certainly not like 50% less. I mean, that is just crazy. And RAIN also says that 27% of male rape survivors were sexually abused before they were 10. Where'd they get that from? 50% of the children who are sex trafficked in the U.S. are male. So you got an even split. So why are boys less than girls, right? And according to the National Coalition to Prevent Child Sexual Abuse and Exploitation, the average age at which boys first become victims of prostitution is 11 to 13 years old. Unquestionably, when boys or men are sexually abused, it has a profound impact on their psychology and emotional well being. And then here again, another group weighs in. According to the American Psychological Association's Division of Trauma Psychology, this horrific crime has been associated with alcoholism and drug use, anger and aggression, anxiety, depression, intimate relationship problems, poor school and work performance, post traumatic stress disorder, sleep disturbances, suicidal thoughts, and attempts. And then along comes, who are you going to call? According to the World Health Organization, male rape is often not treated as an equal offense with female rape. Keep in mind that the prevalence of falsely reported sexual abuse is very low, between 2 and 10%, according to a review of research. Yeah, I don't think kids are just going to be making up lies about being abused. Sexually abused children are nearly twice as likely to run away from home, which is not surprising since 90% of all child sexual abuse victims know their abuser and want to escape the abuse. So they say that 40% of all victims were victimized by an older child and not an adult. So, yeah, a 2009 research study concluded, and I'm going to be talking a little bit about the prison population here, where they have allowed rape to just run wild for all of these years. So they claim that male prisoners have higher rates of past sexual abuse victimization when compared to those who have never been incarcerated. Once again, this validates the notion that past childhood sexual victimization could lead to significant behavioral problems in which victimization is a pathway into criminality. Well, I don't really know. I don't really know, and I'm not going to really say because I don't know. And at this point, I'm going to read a few myths here. And remember, we're all adults here, okay? Debunking common myths. Part of the problem is that many people today tend to rely heavily on social media without doing their due diligence in determining what is true and what is likely an exaggeration. And I find that all the time. If I read something or somebody says something, I think, oh, that sounds interesting. I fact check it, and 99% of the time, that wasn't the actual quote. It wasn't actually true. The person kind of, social media has become just commentary and beliefs. Like, I believe this happened, not how I looked up and researched it. It's like my feelings count more than my research, right? So let's go through these myths, and keep in mind we're all adults here. If a boy experienced sexual arousal during the abuse, they claim that he wanted and or enjoyed it, and therefore it is his fault. Fact. Males can respond to sexual stimulation with an erection and even an orgasm. However, that does not suggest that they are willingly welcomed the abuse or exploitation. It is simply a biological response to being sexually aroused, even if the experience is traumatic. And same thing with the girls. Myth: sexual abuse is less harmful to boys than to girls. Fact: the harm caused by sexual abuse mostly depends on issues unrelated to gender, including the abuser's identity, the duration of the abuse, whether the child told anyone at the time, and if so, whether the child was believed and helped. Fact: the harm caused by sexual abuse mostly depends on issues unrelated to gender, including the abuser's identity, the duration of the abuse, whether the child told anyone at the time, and if so, whether the child was believed and helped. Myth: most men who sexually abuse boys are homosexual. Fact: research studies to date suggest that men who have sexually abused a boy most often identify as heterosexual and often are involved in adult heterosexual relationships at the time of the abuse. There is no indication that a homosexual man is more likely to engage in sexual abuse behavior than a heterosexual man, and some studies even suggest it is less likely. Myth: boys abused by males must have attracted the abuse because they are homosexual. Fact: there are conflicting theories as to how sexual orientation develops, but experts in human sexuality do not believe that sexual abuse or premature sexual experience play a significant role. Sexual orientation is a complex issue. And they say there's no issue, but I've been saying this for years. Why do you think the women are also masculine now? They have those big old huge jaws and big old huge teeth. The men have the tiny teeth and the baby chins. The men are so embarrassed about their chins that all you see them are getting chin implants all the time. Yeah, the people have reversed. Women now look like men and men now look more like women. And I believe that's because people are born in hospital. You're being exposed to cross-sex hormones. I imagine if you give a baby girl a big, huge shot of testosterone when you have them back in that room shooting them up full of all those drugs, I imagine that would have quite an impact. And that's the only thing I can see that explains it. And of course, if you're a man and you get a lot of estrogen when you're a child instead of testosterone, yeah, you might end up being more feminine, right? Why do you think gay men act like women? Because they probably have too much estrogen. And all you hear these people talk about is all the drugs they're taking. RFK Jr. is gobbling down nicotine and testosterone, and Joe Rogan. They have these events where these guys all get together and they have nurses show up and give them shots and give them IV fluids and stuff. These people are gobbling down steroids and all kinds of stuff. And I believe it's because of exposure to doctors. Doctors have been cross contaminating our systems. This is about eugenics. So you tell me if it sounds crazy to you. Why do you think it's happening? Why do you think men all have those weak little chins now and women have the big, huge, huge jaws and those big old teeth? Because the last few generations have been getting so much of the cross hormones secretly by their doctors or whatever they're eating or doing or the pill. Something's going on. Something's going on. And that's exactly likely what it is. So, and yeah, that's how I think they create gay people. And I know that probably sounds ignorant to some people, but I'm not going to go into more of an explanation now. That's 100% my belief. I would actually die on this hill. So, anyway, so let me keep reading here. Myth: if a female used or abused a boy, he was lucky. And if he does not feel that way, there must be something wrong with him. Fact: in reality, premature, coerced, or otherwise abused or exploited sexual experiences are never positive. Female abusers often hold a position of power over their victims, such as si- an older sister, sister of a friend, babysitter, neighbor, aunt, and mother. At a minimum, the victimization can cause confusion and insecurity and can adversely affect trust and intimacy. Well, not as a minimum, as a whole. Myth: boys who are sexually abused will go on to abuse others. Fact: as a professor, I'm not talking, this is somebody else talking. As a professor, I encounter this one quite often from students in my courses. This myth is especially dangerous because it can create terrible fear and anxiety in boys and men who feel they must not be around children. They may not only fear becoming abusers themselves, but if others find out that they were abused, they will be seen as potentially dangerous to children. Sadly, boys and men who tell of being sexually abused are often viewed as potential perpetrators rather than victims who need support and guidance. While it is true that some child sexual abusers were abused as children themselves, most will not go on to sexually abuse others. Yeah, and RAIN, that fabulous group, they quote 1 in 6 women raped or attempted rape. And they say 1 in 33 men raped or attempted rape. And they use that 33, right? So let's talk about some of these laws. For centuries, marriage age and age of consent were basically the same number. Only in the late 19th and 20th century did they begin to diverge. And that divergence reflects a major shift in how society understood childhood, coercion, and state protection. So, according to them, and like I said, this could be just to make it all like, well, they always did it. We've always done it. Phase one, the late 1800s, they had the medieval canon law roots. The girls, the age of consent was 12, the boys was 14. These were considered minimum marriageable age under church law. English common law then absorbed that same framework. And in colonial America from 1600 to 1700s, colonies adopted English common law. Well, because we're still British, right? Age of consent, typically 10 to 12 years old. Marriage age, typically 12 for girls with parental consent. I don't know. Does anybody have a memory? Can you remember being 10 and 12 years old? My God, and being told you're going to get married, go have kids and stuff? So there was no meaningful distinction between old enough to marry and old enough to consent to sex. Sex was assumed to occur within marriage. The law did not conceptualize adolescent sexual exploitation outside that framework. And then we had the age of consent marriage 1880s to 1920s. Major reform wave in 1880s. Most US states age of consent 10 to 12 years old. Marriage was still 12 to 14, often with parental consent. The reformers, including early feminists, social purity advocates, journalists, and physicians, began pushing age of consent upward. By 1920, most states had raised the age of consent to 16 to 18. But marriage ages were still often lower if parents consented. So don't get tricked by all this stuff, because in a lot of states in this country, all it takes is you have to go maybe across a border from the state that you're in to the next state who has more favorable laws, and you can get your kid married very easily. So there is a very squishiness to this whole thing. It is still very much still being done. And then phase three, the marriage exception, 1920s to 1970s. Throughout the 20th century, in many states, the age of consent was 16 to 18. The marriage age was lower with parental consent. Some states allowed marriage below consent age with judicial approval. So, if a minor married an adult, statutory rape protections often did not apply. And that's exactly what they do is they marry if the kid gets pregnant by an abuser, usually a relative or somebody, what happens is you marry the kid off, your problem goes away. So that's exactly the trick that they're all playing. So phase four, 1980s to present, it just baffles my mind that this is so close to us right now. So, marital rape exemptions were dismantled from 1975 to 1993. Gender neutral rape laws were adopted. Child protection statutes were strengthened. Many states raised minimum marriage ages. Some states eliminated child marriage entirely. But like I said, just go to the next state, you'll take care of it then. But now the age of consent is typically 16 to 18. So some states now require 18 with no exceptions, but yeah, there's all these loopholes, right? So they always tied all this together. So before 1880, marriage was defined by sexual legality. After 1920, sexual consent law began overriding marriage. After 1993, even marriage no longer shielded rape. So up until 1993, you could legally rape your wife. I would say how far we've come, but 1993 was not that long ago. So, yeah, I'm going to go through the timeline criminalization of child rape and age of consent laws. During the ancient and medieval periods, 2000 BCE in Babylon, sexual assault addressed primarily as a property crime against a father or husband. No modern concept of child protection. Then we have the Roman law, 1st to 4th century CE. Rape was prohibited, but primarily framed around family honor. Age protections varied. Consent standards were not child centered. And medieval Europe, 5th to 15th centuries, canon law, those churches, and secular law recognized rape, but enforcement was inconsistent. Child protection was not systematically defined. Marriageable ages could be as low as 12 for girls under church law. Then during the early modern period, England, 1275, the Statute of Westminster, rape criminalization, but age of consent was set at 12 years old. England, 1576, confirmed age of consent at 10 in some interpretations, still extremely low. Colonial America, 1600s to 1700s. Colonies, of course, adopted English common law. Age of consent typically between 10 and 12 years old. Who on this planet thought a 10 or 12-year-old girl should go and start having sex and children? So, yeah, 10 and 12 seems to be the thing. I've got all this over down below. You can take a look yourself. It is just, I find it, actually, I do find it quite shocking to tell you the truth. And here's where the trick really gets going. Um, so, how did those churches start getting away with raping all the children? Well, from medieval Europe through most of the 20th century, clergy held extraordinary moral authority. In many communities, a priest's word outweighed a child's. Police deferred to church leadership. Families were pressured not to scandalize the church. This was not just cultural, it influenced prosecutorial direction. Yeah, because those churches have always run things now, haven't they? Those satanic places that they are. And then, of course, we have the evil statutes of limitation. This became one of the most damaging legal barriers. Of course, who created these legal barriers? Well, of course they did, right? Historically, many states required charges get filed within 3 to 5 years. So if you're a child, you get raped at 10, you better hop to and report that crime before you're 15 years old. And civil lawsuits must be filed within a short window after the victim turned 18. But child sex abuse victims often disclose decades later, and they, of course, knew all that. By the time survivors spoke out, the legal window had closed, and that meant no prosecution, no civil damages, no discovery process, no institutional accountability. It wasn't until the 1990s to 2020s that many states began extending or eliminating statutes of limitation for child sex abuse. That is the most shocking thing I've heard in a long time now. The 1990s to 2020, they began to start extending the statutes of. It's just crazy, isn't it? Until 1993 in the U.S., marital rape exemptions existed in some form. That mattered in religious communities where early marriage was encouraged. Clergy abuse intersected with family power structures. Patriarchal legal norms discourage reporting. When clergy abuse cases usually involve minors outside marriage, the broader legal culture minimized coercion inside legal authority structures. Until the 1970s to 2012, male victims were often excluded from rape statutes. excluded, totally excluded. This had profound implications in Catholic seminaries, boarding schools, and religious youth programs. Boys abused by clergy were frequently not legally categorized as rape victims under older statutory definitions. And that, of course, shaped the police reporting, statistical tracking, public awareness, and media framing. See, this is why I don't make any sense out of any of these so called people doing these studies and stuff. How do these people know anything? I mean, really, it doesn't seem possible to me that any of these studies would make much sense. So, and it always turns out this way. In many documented cases across denominations, accused clergy were reassigned. Settlements were required confidentiality. Church investigations replaced criminal ones. Victims were pressured to forgive or remain silent. The law did not create abuse. What they did was they had weak enforcement. So let's go through this. 1980 to 1990s expanded child abuse reporting laws. 1990s mandatory reporter statutes were strengthened. 2002, it sounds like it was like last week, right? Major investigative journalism exposed systematic cover ups, and that would have been the Boston case. Federal child exploitation laws were strengthened. Really? About time, right? In 2020, civil litigation became a primary tool for accountability, not because the abuse was new, but because the legal structure finally began catching up. And I would have to say 100% on purpose. Children abused by religious leaders historically faced laws that did not clearly protect them based on age, definitions of rape that excluded grooming and coercion, cultural deference to clergy, short statutes of limitation, institutional secrecy reinforced by legal hurdles. The result was not simply under prosecution, it was delayed recognition. Child sexual abuse has occurred across religious traditions, secular schools, sports organizations, and youth programs. But the funny thing is that no matter how much it goes on, there were not the laws to deal with it. It got covered up and it got shut up. Those kids were all told that they did not have a case. Nobody imagine the extra impact. You're a kid, you finally come to term with things and you finally start to speak out. This all happened, let's say, when you're 10. Now you're 30, right? You finally got the guts to speak out and you finally got the self-confidence to say that was a bunch of bullshit and I'm not going to take it anymore. You speak out, right? Well, hey, too bad for you. Too late. Statute of limitations are up. Hey, but you probably really liked it. You probably really wanted it. You wonder why nobody's speaking out? Because nobody has been willing to hear the people who want to speak out. All of these children abused by all these clergies. And keep in mind, it is not just white kids in fancy churches in the United States and Europe. There are little shacks being called churches all across the world, all over Africa, all over these poor countries. Churches calling themselves the place to go and be seen and heard and worshiped and all of that. Churches are really the satanic organization that's propping this all up. And I don't know how many people it's going to take. If you want to argue that none of this is true, then in fact you are arguing that you want children to be able to be raped at younger and younger ages, right? Because here's what really happens. If the abuse happened, let's say in the 1960s to the 1990s, and the victim discloses in their 30s or 40s, well, the criminal thing has expired. Too bad. Can't do anything criminally. The civil thing may have expired, and no prosecution was possible. This wasn't originally designed around religious abuse. The laws were cultured, the laws were made to make the physical abuse by churches happen more often and happen without any repercussions. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know why I find it so shocking because I'm pretty hard to shock, but yeah, it's it's pretty hard to realize that for all this time these satanic demons calling themselves lawyers and stuff were doing all of this to rig against the children. You know, the same children they have in their own homes that they claim to love. How can you be an attorney or any of these people and really love your own children if this is how you're willing to treat other children? That is because you are satanic. Full stop. I'm going to be wrapping this up. Give me a second here. I got to close off this file and just move on to the next. Okay, so here is legally how they rigged it. Rape was criminalized from the earliest colonial statutes. It was legally defined as forced vaginal intercourse by a man against a woman who was not his wife. So they excluded marital rape from the beginning. So forced vaginal intercourse by a man against a woman who was not his wife. So for most of U.S. history, a husband could not rape his wife under the doctrine of implied consent. That began changing in the 1970s. The first statute was Nebraska, 1975. By 1993, all 50 states had removed the full marital rape exemption. Well, you know, when people wise up, they get forced to make changes, right? That's why you got to start doing something about things. Sitting quietly really hasn't worked very well now, has it? So yeah, I've got all the details about all this thing about raping your wife and all this. The victim had to be female. Penetration had to be penile vagina. So yeah, that was why how they limited and got the men to not be involved, right? Because if you weren't raped that way, then you didn't have a case. So men forced to penetrate someone were not counted. Men forcibly penetrated were often excluded statistically. Many police departments mirrored this wording. Yeah, penetration, no matter how slight, of the vagina or anus with any body part or object or oral penetration without consent. And that was the big shift. And it did not happen until 2003. The UK reformed rape law under Sexual Offences Act 2003. However, rape is still legally defined as penile penetration. So legally, only someone with a penis can commit rape. Female perpetrators who penetrate males are charged under assault by penetration, not rape. Boy, that's pretty crazy, huh? So even after reform, they still have little ways they can jig this system, right? So women can still rape males and they get different charges. So in multiple jurisdictions globally, rape is defined as male on female. Male victims are prosecuted under lesser sexual assault statutes. In some legal systems, male rape is not explicitly recognized at all. The United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime and who are you going to call have both documented legal gaps in gender neutral sexual violence statutes. So, because of narrow legal definitions, male rape victims, people in prison, were historically minimized. Military sexual assault against men was underclassified. Institutional abuse in churches, schools, and reformatories involving boys was often charged with indecent statutes rather than rape. So that, of course, shaped the sentencing severity, the media coverage, the public understanding, and victim services. So when the law defines rape narrowly, statistics undercount male victims. Funding for male services remain minimal. Public perception skews female only. Prosecutors choose lesser charges. Survivors internalize invisibility. The exclusion was not always ideological. It was often inertia plus historical sexual morality frameworks. But the outcome was real. Male rape was legally erased for centuries in many systems. Recognizing male exclusion does not negate female victimization, but we need to wakey to the fact that men are in pretty deep trouble. Hang on for a second. And as far as the men being raped in prison, well, that only happened in 2003 under the Prison Rape Elimination Act, or PREA. Prison Rape Elimination Act passed unanimously by Congress in 2003. Why? Because it would make you look like the losers you are by not passing it. What PREA did, it created a national commission to study prison. This is what they always do. Mandated national data collection. Yeah, who? The people at RAIN are going to do all this? Require development of standards for prevention. But PREA does not create a private right to sue. It establishes administrative standards and funding incentives. Facilities that do not comply risk losing certain federal funds. Well, yeah, so they say, right? They probably actually get a bonus when they do it. Um, because here's the thing, journalists can't just walk into a prison and say, hey, we want to look around. So who knows what's going on, right? There was that prison case, but I'm not going to be able to talk about it today. I really need to close this file off. So, yeah, the sad news is men are being raped in prison. Men are being raped all over the world. I have much more that I'll be covering very soon in the next show. And then I'll have much more when I cover the Department of Defense show. It is a sad deal. Very sad deal going on. And I certainly hope that people are going to be paying attention to all this. I don't know what to do about it. I'll try to think about it and I'll try to talk about it next before I open the next show because I need to give you some trigger warnings because I'm very concerned that people might be having some previously undisclosed issues coming up that you did not realize were happening before. And what happens is that our bodies are just terrific in our minds, and in order to survive severe trauma, our mind goes in and shuts it down and only starts to release it when we're able to release it. And usually it'll come as a surprise. I don't know if it works differently when it's not a surprise. Like I'm going through that myself now, but to me it's not a surprise. So maybe I'm going to process it differently. Maybe I just don't even know. So I plan to address that next because I think it is going to be a pretty big deal. And with the way the world is going now, I don't plan on going to seeking any therapy or any. I personally am in a different position. I'm being killed by the government, so who on earth would I trust to go and talk to about things? Nobody. I'm not talking to any of these people. So, but there is hope for you if you feel that these things may have happened. It's not going to be 100% negative. I think the important thing to do is to stay grounded, block your energy from outside sources. And, well, we're going to be on this boat for a while. How rocky it's going to get, I really don't know. I really don't have any idea. And of course, if inmates want to report their rape or any of that kind of stuff, well, you're vulnerable because they have that thing called the diesel thing where they just say that you're being transferred and they put you on a van and just drive you around for days and weeks and months. Yeah. So you're in a very lack of power position because they can transfer you around, they can take away your privileges, and you're not going to be able to get much help if you're in prison. So, um, well, the law just came about in 2003. So supposedly there's reporting systems, audits, and data collection. I'll do my best to look for them, but I don't have high hopes that everything's just being just taken care of, right? Um, I would have to believe that it is probably still going on the same. And I feel a great deal of guilt over all this. These people in prison are also our people, right? They didn't deserve any of that. A lot of them got in prison on trumped up charges, and then they do really crazy things like Biden says, well, I'm going to let everybody out of prison that's there on marijuana charges. What a stupid statement. You know why he said that? Because it was never going to happen. When they catch a black person or a brown person with weed, you get all kinds of added charges added to your bill. So it's not just a marijuana charge. They tag on just distribution, they try to get you for sales and all kinds of stuff. So it is not as simple as that. They're locking up all of these men. They're allowing them to be raped. Why? Because they provide labor. Most U.S. corporations hire prison labor. And just keep in mind this: silence is what is keeping this going. Silence. Do you want to be part of that silence or part of the solution? The choice is up to you. Be safe out there and goodbye for now.